Remember, if you don't like, comment, or subscribe, I'm gonna come in your house and eat all your snacks. None of them safe. I'm gonna steal your cereal too, nigga.
Did the FBI target pop stars and actresses, even leading to the death of one of them? What about the secret recording of a man who predicted JFK's assassination? A recording the FBI chose not to share with the Warren Commission. And did the FBI really spread misinformation to ignite a race war? These are just a few of the shocking operations and cover-ups the FBI has been involved in. And trust us, there's a lot more where that came from on today's episode of The Infographic Show. FBI conspiracies that were true. Number 12. Dark correspondence. During J. Edgar Hoover's 48 years at the helm of the FBI, the Bureau had a favorite pastime: writing letters. Not the friendly kind, though. These were anonymous, poison-penned messages designed to intimidate, manipulate, and stir up trouble. It sounds like the kind of thing a tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist would say, but it actually happened in Operation Hoodwink. In the late 1960s, the FBI pulled out every dirty trick in the book to manipulate the Cosa Nostra, aka the Italian-American Mafia, to murder American communists, members of the Communist Party, CPUSA. The FBI sent anonymous letters to mafia bosses, posing as Communist Party members and issuing threats of violence. They also claimed that CPUSA members were secretly snitching on the mob. They hoped that the
Nah, that's insane. Manipulating the mob to get rid of people that believe in communism on U.S. soil? Nah, these niggas too sophisticated.
mob would take matters into their own hands and eliminate the targets for the FBI. When the mafia didn't take the bait, the FBI shifted tactics, this time targeting union bosses. In one letter, an anonymous, concerned worker claimed that his brother-in-law had just returned from Russia and was planning to make the unions respectable again by violently eliminating the mafia's influence. The letter ended, "I'm afraid these commies mean business, so watch out." The FBI knew the letter would reach mobsters, hoping that it would push them to send...
Oh yeah, because if y'all didn't know, the mob used to control the unions back in the day. Oh, you manipulating ass motherfuckers.
in their contract killers. But once again, the mafia didn't bite. But the letters didn't stop there. As most Americans were hoping their law enforcement agencies were making their streets safer for them, the FBI was trying to start all-out gang warfare. It wrote letters to a violent street gang in Chicago, the Blackstone Rangers, telling lies about an imminent attack from the Black Panthers. One of the letters was to a boss, Jeff Fort, claiming the Panthers were after him. As the New York Times later wrote, these fake correspondence efforts were to stir bloody gang warfare, and this time it worked. Thanks to the letters, at least 4 black activists were murdered. After similar letters were sent to gangs in San Diego, the FBI proudly said in a memo, shootings, beatings, and a high degree of unrest continue to prevail in the ghetto area of Southeast San Diego. To be clear, the FBI considered this a success. That same memo, titled Tangible Results, said a substantial amount of unrest is directly attributable to this program. According to the Civil Liberties Defense Center, the FBI deliberately spread false rumors within black gangs and activist organizations, claiming that there was a snitch in their ranks. They hoped that this would be resolved with extreme violence. The FBI called this tactic snitch jacketing, a method designed to paint innocent men as informants for the FBI or CIA, hoping that their groups would turn against them. They even wrote to men's spouses about infidelity that didn't happen, hoping that it would destroy their families' lives. If that didn't work, the Bureau simply told local police forces to arrest the men over absolutely nothing. In one FBI memo from the 1960s titled Key Black Activists, it said that people should be repeatedly arrested, quote, on any excuse, until they could no longer make bail. Now let's look at a man the FBI threw everything at, every dirty trick in the book, and they still couldn't bring him down. Well, I guess that depends on which story you believe. Number 11. Killing King. Martin Luther King Jr. had the internal strength to withstand an all-out war against him. Before his assassination in 1968, he had become deeply unpopular in the U.S., largely due to a relentless FBI smear campaign that shaped public perception. In 1963, only 37% of Americans had a negative view of King. By 1966, that number had jumped to 63%, fueled by negative press and disinformation spread by the FBI. King had expanded his message beyond civil rights, speaking out on labor rights, poverty, and American imperialism. He urged people of all races to peacefully unite against what he saw as a corrupt government. But the media really turned against him after he declared that the US was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. By speaking out against militaristic foreign policies, King had made himself an enemy of the so-called liberal elites. The New York Times, in a dismissive piece titled Dr. King's Error, essentially told him to stay in his lane, focusing on racial tensions in Chicago, Harlem, and Watts, instead of global issues. Meanwhile, Life magazine went even further, calling his criticism of U.S. foreign policy demagogic slander. The message was clear: challenging racism was one thing, but challenging American power was another. Before he was murdered, King was planning to bring hundreds of thousands of people of all races together in the Poor People's Campaign to a protest camp in Washington, D.C. As he talked about class struggle, human rights, and bloody imperialism, he wasn't showing any signs of backing down. This was
Oh, my bad. Yo, I just need to stretch my back. Alright, I'm better. Let's hop to it.
Despite the FBI bugging his home, they bugged the hotels he stayed in. They followed King everywhere, even planting violent protesters at his speeches to make him appear dangerous to the American public. But their tactics didn't stop there. In one of their most infamous moves, the Bureau sent King an anonymous letter, one they hoped would break him. Inside the package was a tape recording compiled from the bugs the FBI had planted. FBI audio technician John Matter handed over the tape, which the Bureau claimed contained evidence of King engaging in orgiastic trysts with prostitutes, what they called the depths of his sexual perversion and depravity. King always knew the FBI was using underhanded tactics against him, but this was taking things too far. Not for a minute did he believe the letter and the tapes were from a disgruntled member of the civil rights movement, as the FBI wanted him to think. He knew it was from them. Knowing he had a conscience, the letter told him to, quote, do the right thing over his alleged cheating on his wife. It called him a colossus fraud, evil and vicious, an abnormal moral imbecile. It said that he should take his filthy, fraudulent self and disappear himself from the face of the planet. And it was all sanctioned by Hoover and backed by the CIA, which had its own anti-King surveillance program.
Wow.
As you know, he was eventually stopped, but not by pressure and smears, but with a single bullet. We'll come back to that topic later. But first, let's see who else the FBI manipulated and in the end destroyed. Number 10. Y'all can't be playing no checkers on no chessboard. United States Penitentiary, Hazleton, West Virginia. At 8:20 a.m. on October 30th, 2018, the wheelchair-bound James Whitey Bulger Jr. was set upon by fellow inmates, including an extremely violent convicted mafia hitman of the Genovese crime family. By the time the officers found the 89-year-old, he was barely recognizable. He'd been smashed in the face and the head with a heavy padlock contained within a sock, his skull shattered. And yet, some people said this ailing old man had gotten what he deserved. After all, as the leader of the infamous Winter Hill Gang, he had been one of the most ruthless gangsters in American history. He was also a rat, an FBI informant who was able to rule over Boston for decades with an iron fist, partly thanks to his friends in the Bureau. This impunity was sanctioned by the highest levels at the FBI. In what former agent John Connolly Jr., Bulger's handler, told the LA Times later, was the worst cover-up in the modern annals of the Justice Department. Bulger's connection to the U.S. government agencies went back a long way. Before his rise to the position of gang boss, he was a guinea pig in the CIA's Nuremberg code-breaching MK-Ultra mind control experiments. The year was 1956, under a program at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, where the 27-year-old Bulger was detained for truck hijacking. Dr. Carl Pfeiffer told Bulger and 19 other inmates that they'd receive a sentence reduction if they tested drugs in what they were told was a trial related to a cure for schizophrenia. They were injected with massive doses of LSD almost daily for months on end. The CIA wanted to know if they could control their minds, to turn the men into assassins. At this point in his life, Bulger had never killed anyone. They fed him that LSD and they kept asking him in a monotone voice, "Would you kill someone?" It took him to, quote, the depth of insanity, and indeed he soon got a taste for blood.
So they put him through the MK Ultra program and brainwashed him and turned him to a killer. That shit is insane.
We now know that FBI agents who dealt with Bulger always thought that he would use those experiments as an insanity defense if he ever got arrested. We also now know that for decades after the experiments, he couldn't sleep without a light on, saying he regularly had nightmares and gruesome hallucinations. It wasn't until 1971 that Bulger became a pawn in the system of the government again. That was when he started working with the FBI, supplying valuable information that would make lieutenants into captains. He gave them information that led to the arrests of his enemies, often gangsters in the Italian-American mafia, helping to bring down some of the most powerful families. But the FBI was letting Bulger get away with murder. Agents were telling him everything, giving him information about wiretaps from other law enforcement agencies, essentially making him untouchable in the streets. They told him who the other informants were, and as you could imagine, those guys were soon dealt with. Bulger even gave agents false information to have innocent men locked up for murders that he or his allies had committed. The media later called this an unholy alliance with the FBI. When the cops finally went after Bulger in 1994 under a RICO indictment, he'd been tipped off by his FBI handler. He managed to evade capture for 16 years, climbing to second place on the FBI's most wanted list, right behind Osama bin Laden.
That shit is insane. So he worked with the FBI as a criminal, did everything illegal from murder, starting his own illegal business. That's why he got trapped into a RICO case. Dog. So they literally let him get away with crimes as long as he helped put away other people. That shit is crazy.
The authorities finally caught up to him in his 80s. Bulger claimed that he'd been granted criminal immunity by a now deceased federal prosecutor. And as if his story couldn't get any wilder, it turned out that his brain had been experimented on in the CIA's MKUltra program. Bulger's FBI handler and a few others did face consequences, but they later claimed that they were just fall guys taking orders from higher-ups. The entire saga was a massive embarrassment for the FBI and other agencies, exposing deep corruption within the system. And in the end, Bulger learned the hard way: no one beats the system. The FBI plays chess, the criminals play checkers. And in this game, there's only ever one loser. Let's now look at when the FBI went after pop stars, the most deadly of species. Number 9. The Ballad of Lennon and Hoover. During J. Edgar Hoover's tenure at the FBI, he amassed files on around 25 million Americans, often through illegal means. Most of those files were on a man who had once sung "All You Need Is Love," and he wasn't even an American. We're talking about John Lennon, the Beatles maestro who once infuriated the Ku Klux Klan and sent pious Americans into a frenzy when he famously claimed that the band was more popular than Jesus. These record burners might have said that it was instant karma when Lennon was gunned down in the street in New York City on December 8, 1980, by a mentally unstable fan. By this point, the FBI had been hounding Lennon for years, causing him severe stress. The Bureau believed that all that talk about peace on Earth was getting into the heads of red-blooded American kids. They're potential soldiers or voters for future wars. So with the green light from the government, they made his life a misery. They put him under constant surveillance. They tried to get the Immigration and Naturalization Service to kick him out of the country. 200 letters of protest were written, including one by Bob Dylan, who ironically was also an unknowing target of an FBI covert program. An FBI memo written by the New York office suggested that Lennon should, quote, be arrested, if at all possible, on possession of...
So they literally tried to ruin his life just because... First of all, one thing I can guarantee right now is that a lot of niggas a part of Gen Z aren't going to enlist, even if we do go to war. I promise you, niggas would rather be in prison than enlist. Hell, I go to Canada before I enlist and then accidentally lose my passport. Free healthcare from now on, nigga. But anyway, they literally made his life and I think one of his band members a living hell just because peace is something that the government didn't want. Like, that shit is insane. Because it wouldn't benefit them in the way that they want. Like, that shit is crazy. But let's continue.
Of narcotics charges when he was in Miami. It sounded like they were talking about planting it on him and then using the arrest as an excuse to deport him. A declassified 1972 letter revealed just how deep the FBI's surveillance on Lennon went. Agents had even taken note of his friend Linda's pet parrot. But this wasn't just any parrot, it could squawk the words right on. That's right, American taxpayers were funding perhaps the only parrot-related national security threat in US history. Some of the Lennon memos went all the way up to the White House. Many still remain classified. Even now, a lot of the declassified Lenin files have been heavily redacted, encouraging conspiracy theorists to think that this Beatles maverick was killed in an MK Ultra-based hit. We're not sure about that, but this next guy, his assassination has conspiracy written all over it. Number 8. The conspiracy theory that came true. There are a lot of theories out there, well-developed ones, that say that MLK, JFK, and to a lesser extent RFK were assassinated in government conspiracies. But today we're not interested in theories, we want facts. So let's say something about Malcolm X, the civil rights activist who was shot 21 times in Manhattan's Audubon Ballroom on February 21, 1965. 3 men were convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison.
It was like 5 men that assassinated him, though. That's what I don't understand.
Decades, researchers, historians, and journalists all pointed to the same conclusion. This was a travesty of justice. They argued that 2 of the men were completely innocent and that the trial had been a farce. And it turned out they were right. The NYPD and the FBI had been withholding key evidence. Some of the witnesses at the trial were actually FBI informants. But no one knew because J. Edgar Hoover ordered them to stay silent.
Wow.
We now know that both agencies had hid witness statements that could have proven the 2 men's innocence. According to the Innocence Project, the case was a blatant setup. There was no physical evidence linking the 2 men to the crime, and the actual shooter even testified that they had nothing to do with it. Still, for many years, much of the general public didn't think law enforcement could sink that low. The family of Malcolm X is suing the NYPD, FBI, and CIA for what it says was the orchestration of the assassination.
I don't blame him, bro. I just heard about this last year. It's just that I didn't know all of this. Like, he set it up so perfectly to the point where we thought the people who did it actually didn't do it. Well, one of them did, but the other 2 actually had nothing to do with it. Like, that shit is insane. I don't blame him for trying to sue the fucking FBI and CIA. I just hope they actually get away with it. Because there's one thing to sue the FBI, but CIA, good luck with that one.
They're also calling for new investigations into the assassinations of the Kennedy brothers and MLK. Now, let's take a look at one of the most shameful cases in FBI history. Number 7. The Federal Bureau of Execution.
Dog, we only on 7.
Spying and smearing we've talked about so far fell under the FBI's counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO. The program was designed by Hoover in the 1950s to rid the US of its so-called subversive elements and apparently talking parrots. Declassified memos show the plan was to harass, discredit, threaten, infiltrate, wrongfully imprison, and neutralize so-called enemies of the state. And by neutralize, that meant to take out by any means necessary. Wow. One of the men on the neutralization list was the Chicago Black Panther Party chairman Fred Hampton, whose body was riddled with government-issued bullets on December 4, 1969. The question people have asked for years was, did the FBI do it? Or at least arrange it? Hampton was a prime target according to declassified documents. Like MLK, he was calling for black and white solidarity and criticizing what he saw as needless poverty among the masses. We now know the Bureau sabotaged his operations by using someone from his inner circle as an informant. This was the Black Panther William O'Neill, who was handled by Special Agent Roy Martin Mitchell. O'Neill had been arrested for car theft and impersonating a federal officer, and to avoid prison he agreed to infiltrate—
He impersonated a policeman, not an FBI agent.
—the Black Panthers. He was a valuable informant, and he helped them get to Hampton. It was the early morning of December 4th, 1969. A team of Chicago police officers burst into the apartment where Hampton was staying. They already had the layout of the place thanks to O'Neill, who had also slipped a sleeping pill into Hampton's drink. At the time of the raid, Hampton was in bed fast asleep with his girlfriend, who was 8.5 months pregnant with their child. 2 teams of 8 men bust through the door, instantly killing a sitting security guy. Hampton, still sedated due to barbiturates, was shot twice in the head at point-blank range. 4 men asleep in another bedroom were shot and beaten and then dragged outside. They were later charged with attempted murder, but the charges were dropped since, well, they hadn't done anything. The press parroted the official line, saying that the men in the house were, quote, extremely vicious and had come at the local cops like a pack of armed, angry raptors. The officers, said the press, had acted very bravely and had also shown, quote, incredible restraint by not putting bullets in every man's head. The public heard that the cops had been there to serve a search warrant for illegal weapons, not mentioning anything about informants or the FBI's plan to take out Fred Hampton. Neutralization had been a great success, and the press made murder sound respectable. Hoover even secretly gave out bonuses. It was only later that the newspapers such as the New York Times said, quote, officials had engaged in a deliberate publicity campaign to depict the Panthers as the aggressors. Even then, there was no mention of the FBI's major role. In 1971, a break-in at an FBI office in Pennsylvania exposed COINTELPRO to the public for the first time, along with the FBI's involvement in Fred Hampton's murder. People learned about O'Neill and the fact that he got $300 for that floor plan that he provided the FBI. Surely some people then said that this had been an execution of innocent men.
You did all that for $300, nigga? Well, $300 today is different from $300 back then, but still.
Which wasn't supposed to be legal in the USA. But in a subsequent trial, after what was said to be 18 months of damning evidence, the judge absolved everyone involved. That included the execution squad, which unleashed a hail of 90 bullets on the sleeping men using a machine gun, a rifle, shotguns, and handguns. No one fired back. The only shot from inside of the apartment came by accident when a man at the door, already near death, convulsed and pulled the trigger, sending a single bullet into the ceiling. Then, in a later trial in 1982, the U.S. government, Cook County, and the city of Chicago came under fire for two conspiracies. One, planning and executing the assassination, and two, conducting a post-raid cover-up. The government lost and had to settle for almost $6 million in today's money. In 2020, several hundred pages of FBI memos were released. One of them a letter from Hoover to O'Neill's handler, Agent Mitchell, that said, I am certainly pleased to commend you and to advise you that I have approved an incentive award in the amount of $200 for your outstanding services in a matter of considerable interest to the FBI in the racial field. Let's now see how the FBI tried to start a race war. Number 6. Divide and conquer. We also know that the FBI was trying to cause friction between various activist groups who believed in a lot of the same things. It tried to get the Panthers in a fight with the Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS, a large leftist anti-Vietnam War organization of mostly young middle-class white students. While the working classes and black activists were often on the same side as the SDS, the kind of people often called liberal and entitled, there were tensions about methods and sometimes differences in ideology. The FBI saw an opportunity to fan the flames and get everyone falling out, hoping the more aggressive factions would turn to violence. Basically, they wanted to create a culture war. A declassified memo revealed, through Black Panther informants and other black nationalist informants plant the idea that the SDS is exploiting the BPP by trying to use them as cannon fodder for a white revolution. Another memo stated, the concept of white students studying in universities while Black Panthers are going to jail or being killed in the ghetto would be encouraged. The FBI deliberately stoked division, encouraging black activists to distrust or retaliate against white activists. They knew exactly what they were doing, fueling the potential conflict between the groups and deepening racial tensions across the U.S. Polarization, in the FBI's eyes, was a win-win. It would weaken both movements and allow them to crush dissent on multiple fronts. Under Fred Hampton's Rainbow Coalition, he sought to unite activists of all races to demand better living standards and improved rights, a vision the FBI saw as a direct threat to the status quo. When the Black Panthers launched the Free Breakfast for School Children program to feed impoverished kids, J. Edgar Hoover panicked. The program had spread nationwide, not just feeding children but also steering them away from gang violence and encouraging them to fight poverty, promote justice, and push for peace. Hoover and the agency's response was to spread false rumors that the food was poisoned. This grassroots activism wasn't only for black kids, which to the FBI was even more dangerous, since it could create a sense of solidarity between the races who were concerned about poverty. In a declassified document, Hoover called it the greatest threat to efforts by authorities to neutralize the Black Panther Party. Under J. Edgar Hoover's orders, Domestic Intelligence Chief William C. Sullivan, one of the key figures in the FBI's campaign against MLK, was tasked with discrediting the free breakfast program. Sullivan directed agents to portray the program as a tool for indoctrinating children with violent anti-white propaganda and turning them against the police. When one FBI agent objected and argued that the Bureau shouldn't be targeting humanitarian programs, Sullivan wrote to him stating, "You have obviously missed the point." He then falsely claimed that the Panthers' goal was to fill adolescent children with their insidious poison. Alas, the Bureau came out the winner, persuading the TV-watching populace that breakfast for poor kids was insidious. Yet again, propaganda worked. The public had been played like a dunce cap-wearing fool. The press was very useful. parroting the FBI misinformation campaign that said the program was dangerous and extremists were manipulating innocent little kids. The media covered the high-profile raids, tipped off by the FBI, of the breakfast places where volunteers were handcuffed in front of crying children. Yet the journalists didn't often question the FBI's contention that these alleged racial feeders of kids had sinister motives. Declassified documents show that FBI agents had about 300 cooperating journalists who could write on virtually any topic that was approved by FBI propaganda specialists. Disinformation campaigns we now know were the norm in those days, but some journalists were just not for sale, and Hoover hated them. So let's now take a deeper look at the FBI and the media. Number 5. Public image. A man named James Earl Ray was convicted of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. But in the decades since, serious doubts have emerged about the official lone gunman narrative. Not many people believe the official story, with a 2008 poll showing 86% of black respondents.
If y'all don't know, that's the man that assassinated Martin Luther King while he was in Alabama. But nobody believes that he just acted out of it because he was a racist or anything like that. So
Respondents believe in a conspiracy, while 50% of white respondents agreed with them. The question is, why? Well, the answer to that is in part the American lawyer William F. Pepper, who spent decades researching the assassination. In 1999, with over 70 witnesses and 4,000 pages of transcripts, Pepper represented the King family in a civil trial. The family wasn't interested in money, seeking damages of what was a nominal $100. After the evidence was heard, the jury said governmental agencies were among the conspirators to kill King. These agencies, they said, were deeply involved in the assassination and setting up a patsy. King's former wife, Coretta, stood up and said, "There is abundant evidence of a major high-level conspiracy in the assassination of my husband." But as Pepper wrote in one of his books, the trial and the verdict received little media attention, which only fueled his deep distrust of the press. He wasn't some conspiracy theorist grasping at straws. In fact, Claiborne Carson, director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Papers Project at Stanford University, once said that Pepper's work should be read by every serious student of King's life and his tragic death. Pepper's research into declassified documents revealed that once doubts about the official assassination story started to spread, the FBI moved quickly to control the narrative. In an internal memo, the Bureau stated it wanted a, quote, friendly writer to publish a book about the assassination to preserve the true history. The same document also called for a friendly newspaper to run a news story accusing Coretta Scott King and her closest allies of deliberately plotting to keep King's assassination in the news. The story said the document should make it sound like Coretta and her allies just wanted to, quote, keep the money coming in. The man chosen for the FBI-sponsored book was George E. McMillan, who later wrote The Making of an Assassin, a book Pepper felt was a work of propaganda. This doesn't prove King was assassinated in a conspiracy. The Justice Department has said there is no reason to reopen the case, but the FBI influenced what people saw in their newspapers and books. We already know that J. Edgar Hoover used his friendly contacts in the media to smear people, but we also know that he hated certain journalists who didn't write his chosen narratives. He once called journalist Drew Pearson a jackal and the famed Jimmy Weschler a rat. As for Walter Lippmann, in a secret memo, Hoover called him a coyote of the press. Hoover went as far as leaking to the White House that Joe Alsop, a Washington Insider journalist, was homosexual, hoping to damage his reputation. Hoover also had many good friends in the media, the ones who published his many dodgy leaks without asking too many questions. This included the gossip columnists who helped the FBI smear the American actress and rights activist Jean Seberg. Hoover had FBI agents send anonymous letters to the journalists stating they knew Seberg was sleeping around with various men, including black men. One of the letters said, "The dear girl is getting around," after the writer, an FBI agent, said that he'd seen her pregnant carrying the child of a Black Panther, a lie designed to, quote, cheapen her image. The smears kept on coming, ending up in major newspapers such as the LA Times and Time. The stories were sometimes vicious, which is thought to have led to Seberg drinking heavily and taking sedatives. She also had a miscarriage, and it seems that she became extremely paranoid. She was later found dead in her car in Paris, the result of an overdose of drugs. These days, it's now said the FBI destroyed her. Now let's see how the FBI could get its hands on very personal information. Number 4. Black bag operations. Imagine if all of your personal thoughts, the things you'd only ever said to friends or written in notebooks, were plastered online. You would think that you'd been hacked. Well, that's what the FBI used to do, but by picking the locks of your house and going through your drawers. The highly illegal old-school method was known as black bag operations, where the FBI agents were trained to break into offices or homes, conduct unauthorized searches, steal or photograph sensitive documents, and if it was deemed necessary, they would plant evidence or install bugs to record future conversations. One of the FBI's targets was former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. They looked through her personal files, hoping to prove that she was a communist. The Bureau had heard rumors of Eleanor clubs where communists machinated, bringing down the evil capitalist system, although, as this next declassified message shows, they weren't so sure about it. The message read, "The FBI received an allegation that the rumors of the existence of Eleanor clubs originated from Nazi sources for the purpose of causing dissension." But another message said, "She is the commander-in-chief of communism in the USA. She is becoming overconfident in her power in the US, and by clever investigation she may be exposed now." The FBI built a massive 3,000-page file on Roosevelt, a woman who decried racism and lynching and had once called the FBI, quote, Gestapo-ish. Historians sometimes say it's baffling just how many files Hoover kept on her, seeing as she wasn't much more than a dyed-in-the-wool liberal. In 1943, he bugged a hotel room she was staying in where she was interviewed by a student leader, and later a Pulitzer Prize winner, Joseph P. Lash. Hoover then amassed 400 pages on Lash, who was an anti-war liberal with socialist tendencies. Another victim of the black bag scheme was the heavyweight boxer Muhammad Ali. The FBI saw Ali as a possible threat, mainly because he refused to serve in Vietnam and had criticized the, quote, white man. The FBI tapped his phone. They followed him around. They gained access to his records, including what teachers in elementary school had written about a little boy who was then named Cassius Clay. Ironically, the burglars who broke into the FBI office and got hold of the COINTELPRO documents had chosen the night of the fight of the century, where Ali lost to Joe Frazier. They chose that particular night because they knew every cop in the USA would be watching it. Next question. What did Hoover think about homosexuality, which was illegal in the US under the sodomy laws? Number 3. Hoover, the hypocrite. We now know that Hoover ran what he called a sex deviance program where he kept evidence of homosexual activity in the government. He believed that it was necessary for national security, but also, if the time ever came, he could use it as blackmail. There were purges in the government not just under the anti-communist Red Scare, but also under the Lavender Scare. Some of the FBI files on homosexuality remain classified, and many of them were destroyed in the 1970s. And of what's left, most of the names are redacted. But we know Hoover was obsessed with the sexual activity of others. He had files on politicians that he believed to be sexually promiscuous. In one file that was written after FBI agents had followed around a congressman, it said the man, quote, picked up a Negro female at a low-class night spot and tried to take her to a tourist home. He was later mugged in the street. The Bureau also had a file on 4 prostitutes who were arrested at the Democratic National Convention after they had gone off with a politician whose name was redacted. They even had a file on the leftist actor Errol Flynn, which called Flynn a highly sexed individual, a person of low moral character with absolutely no regard for women. It said that he'd had an affair with every woman who had ever worked on the Warner Brothers lot, from grandmothers on down. And while Hoover was waging war on homosexuals and promiscuous movie stars, it seems that he was madly in love with his second-in-command, Clyde Tolson. The two did absolutely everything together, from going on vacations to cooking and eating Christmas dinners. The two men were like spouses, which seems hypocritical given they were destroying careers by accusing men of loving each other. Maybe it was true love. In a letter written by Hoover to Tolson in 1943, Hoover said, "Words are mere man-given symbols for thoughts and feelings, and they are grossly inefficient to express the thoughts in my mind and the feelings in my heart that I have for you. I hope I will always have you beside me." It said the gangsters Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello had photos of Hoover getting intimate with Tolson. If that's true, it meant organized crime had the blackmail leverage to tell the FBI to keep its nose out of their business. It's rumored that it might have been the CIA who gave the Mafia those images as a means to threaten Hoover, who often sparred with the CIA. They also shared data, with CIA Director Allen Dulles saying in a letter to Hoover in 1957, "Subject admits that since youth he has been a congenital homosexual, sought medical advice and was told that there was nothing to be done about it." The name was redacted, of course. Then there was the party in New York's Plaza Hotel in 1959, which a witness, the wife of one of Hoover's friends, would recall was one of Hoover's famous sex parties. Hoover was described as wearing, quote, a red dress and a black feather boa around his neck. The same witness said young guys arrived dressed in leather and Hoover enjoyed himself with them as they read the Bible. Now let's look at when the FBI got ridiculous. Number 2. War against writers and music. It's a strange thing that Hoover went after pop stars and actors when he was openly denying the existence of a nationwide mafia that he knew very well did exist. Mob boss Frank Costello once told the Justice Department that Hoover was always getting him to fix horse races. Costello said, "You'll never know how many races I had to fix for those lousy bets of his." Hoover did eventually go after organized crime at the behest of attorney Robert Kennedy. But it still seems that he had focused way too much energy on completely stupid things. One of them was the time and the effort spent going after the writer Norman Mailer. Mailer had held a 50th birthday.
So he spent his entire time going after everybody, like musicians, politicians, or even people that were known in economies, instead of going after people like the mob, other big gangs that were in America. He just said, you know what? Let's focus on the people that don't do crimes, or that does do crimes, but not crimes that are typically felonies like murder or racketeering or anything like that. We just gonna go at the irrelevant people that don't relate to any type of criminal activity. Alright, I get it now. I understand it.
Bash in 1973 when he joked that the U.S. needed democratic secret police to keep tabs on the FBI and the CIA. Hoover didn't like public intellectuals, spending 15 years investigating Mailer, tracking who sent Christmas cards to him after writing in a memo that Mailer had once called the FBI a kind of secret police that should be abolished. The file noted that he'd been critical of the FBI in public appearances, and an interview might be embarrassing to the Bureau. Hoover also went after the likes of Gore Vidal and James Baldwin, who he said were corrupting the youth. For the same reason, the FBI had a 119-page file on the pop song Louie Louie, calling it obscene, saying that if you played it slow, it contained filthy, dangerous messages that could corrupt young minds. They even examined the song in a lab. And of course, there was the big file on Bob Dylan, who the FBI said, quote, by means of his folk singing, has the ability to have some communication with American youth. Talking about Dylan, it seems that he's one of the 200 million or so Americans who think that JFK was killed in a government conspiracy, what he called a murder most foul. Did the FBI ever hold information back about JFK's very quick downfall? Number 1. The FBI and JFK. The House Assassinations Committee, which investigated the JFK assassination in 1976, had its experts analyze a photograph of a man taken in Dealey Plaza just before JFK was hit. The man, they said, bears a strong resemblance to Joseph Miltier. This was a man the FBI knew well. A retired FBI agent named Don Adams later saw the photograph and said it was definitely Miltier. I stood next to the man. I interviewed him and I spent hours with him, he said, adding, there's no question in my mind. As soon as I saw that picture, I almost fell off my feet. But who was Joseph Miltier? In the 1960s, Miltier was a part-time union organizer who supported the racist far-right-wing National States Rights Party. In the weeks before the JFK assassination, the FBI had an informant named Willie Somerset secretly record a conversation with Miltier over a matter not related to Kennedy, but Kennedy's trip to Miami came up. Just 13 days before JFK's assassination, Joseph Miltier was caught on tape predicting exactly how it would happen. He stated that a plan was in the working and shockingly described the exact method. Kennedy would be shot from an office building with a high-powered rifle. Even more disturbing, Miltier claimed the plan included a quick arrest to throw the public off, ensuring that someone would be picked up within hours to divert attention from the real perpetrators. The Secret Service was given this recorded statement and Kennedy's motorcade trip through Miami was canceled. But then later in Dallas, he was indeed assassinated. Miltier's prediction came true, but there was no mention of him in the Warren Commission. The strangest thing is that we now know the FBI didn't interrogate Miltier about his prediction. He wasn't even asked if he was there in Dallas when Kennedy was shot.
So he predicted all this shit, but never got investigated. Interesting.
Just closed the book on Miltier. But then, 3 years later, a Miami police officer leaked the recording of his prediction to a local reporter. This was just one of the many things the FBI knew that we would only find out years later. Declassified FBI documents show us that the Soviets believed the assassination wasn't the work of one man, but a carefully planned campaign in which several people played a part. Long after the assassination, it was discovered that Oswald had made threats to the Dallas police 10 days before he was accused of pulling the trigger. But
he told you niggas, I'm gonna kill the president of the United States, and y'all still ain't take any extra precautions. Oh my God. That's all I got to say. Let's just ride it out. Let's finish the video. We got like 2 minutes left anyway.
The FBI saw it fit to destroy that document. Hoover had told the Warren Commission that the FBI had no reason to think Oswald, who they had a file on, was capable of violence. We now know Hoover had the document destroyed that proved this to be false. In early 2025, the FBI told the media it was about to send 2,400 files on the JFK assassination to the National Archives to be declassified. Whether we'll learn something new remains to be seen. But we know from other recently released FBI files more about Jack Ruby, the man who had shot the alleged JFK assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. According to the FBI files declassified in 2017, an FBI informant named Bob Vanderslice was with Jack Ruby as they watched JFK's motorcade pass by on the day of the assassination. Ruby had also made a stunning prediction. The document states, the informant stated that on the morning of the assassination, Ruby contacted him and asked if he would like to watch the fireworks. He was with Jack Ruby and standing at the corner of the Postal Annex building facing the Texas School Book Depository building at the time of the shooting. This contradicts the Warren Commission's claim that Ruby was 5 blocks away when JFK was shot. The FBI could have challenged this, but instead they buried the file. Then there was the suppressed memo from J. Edgar Hoover himself, which stated, "Last night we received a call in our Dallas office from a man talking in a calm voice and saying he was a member of a committee organized to kill Oswald." Despite this clear warning, security around Lee Harvey Oswald remained shockingly lax. And just 1 day later, Ruby, with a gun in his hand, was somehow able to walk right up to America's most important prisoner and silence him forever. Which of these FBI conspiracies shocked you the most? Do you think there are even bigger secrets still buried in classified files? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Now go watch Was President JFK Really Killed by the CIA? Or if you want...
I doubt it. So they silence singers, politicians, and public activists like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Fred Hampton. Wow. But anyway, YouTube, that's gonna wrap it up for this video. I know I don't have my usual intro, but that's because I'm streaming right now. I'm trying to do it at least every other day, maybe every day, probably not every day, because I'm start working in the week. But anyway, it's been your boy KTV, and I'm out of here. Deuces.